we just went all down this path, seeing how there wasn't anything for us. And we just like, you know what, this is silly. This is not how professionals would manage a property. And if we're going to continue to grow our portfolio, then something's got to change. And we just realized we weren't the only ones that would be having these problems, and said, let's do something about it.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else with your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik, and with me, as always, John Cohen. John, how are you?
I'm doing good. I got no complaints. Wrapping up a short week, getting ready for Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get some of that delicious food in me. I don't
go.
know about you, but I get two. So I get a nice dinner and then a dinner and dessert. So it'll be nice.
This is the first year my cousin's getting married in Cabo.
Yeah.
So I will be enjoying a Mexican Thanksgiving at a wedding. So we are going to find out how that's going to go, but we're excited. Exactly. We have a lot of moving parts, but should be good.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'm super pumped. My mom's in town too, so I haven't seen her in a couple weeks. So that'll always be nice, Mom, if you're listening. Love you. We got a good guest on today. Don't want to go too into it because we want to be mindful of time. But I think he's going to share some good insights. I think you guys were in some stuff we haven't really touched on yet. That'll be interesting. He's also working on, more of the tech side now for some, management operation owner side, which I think will be interesting to hear some of his stories and insights that he's got there. Without further ado, Laurence, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Chris. John, pleasure to be on. I've been a listener of your first couple podcasts here, so great to see what you guys have done. I guess I'll do a quick intro of myself, if that's
absolutely
sense. So, I started in real estate about 15, 20 years ago. Hard to pinpoint exactly. Time flies. So, started right in college with a buddy of mine. We invested in some property tax lien certificates. That's the kind of thing where if you don't pay your real estate taxes, the government still needs to run their business. So they'll auction those off to private investors, gives investors the opportunity to buy those to kind of liquidate the government. And then the government will help you kind of collect on those tax liens that haven't been paid. So pretty lucrative, tends to be, can be 18% interest on those things every 6 months. So pretty good for a beginner investor to look into. After college, moved on from that, bought my first kind of buy and hold property, which I still have now. It's a 3-flat here in Chicago, which is where I lived, about a mile from my house. And I've had that for a while, and only really increased my portfolio about a year ago, and added a second property, another 3-flat here. It's been fun. It's been interesting, kind of getting experience of what tenants are wanting, and I went into it thinking I was going to get a lot of 3 a.m. calls, and I haven't really been getting those yet. So, fingers crossed, hopefully I don't. And then I've got an offer out on another 4-unit building here in Chicago. So kind of my portfolio is increasing a little bit.
Nice.
I manage them myself. So it's been kind of a fun process.
Fantastic. And what have you been working on recently the last, several years and now?
Sure. So you guys mentioned, a friend of mine and I started a real estate tech business. So that was kind of born out of the idea of these rental properties that I owned. At the time I was working at Goldman Sachs, supporting the hedge fund for investments, and I would be getting requests from my tenants. Just kind of, hey, can I move my rent late a couple of days? And, you start to deal with kind of these tenant issues. I had a friend who was dealing with those same things. So we got together talking about real estate. What kind of tech can you introduce that improves that experience? So we started looking around and saw that there was really good technology for landlords with 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 units. Something like Yardi is incredible for them, but really nothing affordable for a landlord who's got 1 to 10 units. And so that's where we were. We were passing around Excel spreadsheets, trying to manage everything. And we just decided, let's quit our jobs, build this software that kind of mimics what a Yardi does, but makes it available for a really small and independent landlord. And so we set out to do that about 7 years ago. Today, we've got 150,000 landlords using us with 400,000 tenants. So some moderate success there, and it's been growing.
Awesome. So for the people that don't need to hear anything else and want to go check it out, what's the name of the company?
Sure. It's called Avail.
Okay.
You can find it at avail.co. So avail.co.
Perfect. So we'll jump back into that, I think, later on in the episode, but let's dial it back to the beginning. Where were you at in your life when you started, and what got you into the tax deed side of things? Because I think that can be lucrative, but also tough to navigate for the newer person sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that was a while ago now. So when we got started as in college, I think junior year, I was taking a real estate course. And one of the things that got covered in there is like, how do you purchase properties and kind of what are the things you're expected to do once you own one? And the professor went down this path of you got to pay your property taxes. And if you don't, it can get really expensive for you. You can end up paying 36% interest a year, plus all these fees that get tacked on. He mentioned it gets auctioned off to private investors. It was more of like you definitely want to pay your tax warning. And so I turned to a friend of mine and said, hey, why don't we be those investors? So we scrounged up a little bit of money, raised a little bit of money from some friends and family, and went out and participated in one of those auctions and just bought up 42 tax liens. And that was our first foray into it. We ended up doing a little bit of a niche version of it because we only bought mobile home tax lien certificates. So that allows you to diversify a little bit at a cheaper price, and we found that to be effective for us.
When you guys first got into that space, did that niche evolve after going to an auction or reading about it? Or did it just, you fell into it? It's like, no, let's do this.
Yeah, so we started reading about those auctions. So ours was in Champaign County, Illinois, which is it's kind of a smaller county. So even back 15 years ago, the idea of property tax lien certificates were really well established. And if you want to invest in that, the way it works is you're investing on what interest rate you're willing to accept on that tax lien.
Yep.
So it starts at 18% for a 6-month period, and then it's going to be auctioned and bidded down.
Yep.
And so for normal investment property, you're going to be looking at what's closer to a 1 or 2% rate of return. And so we looked at that and we're like, that's fine, but not really good enough for us. And so the ways you can get higher than 2% is one, go to a smaller county. So Champaign County, considerably smaller, you might be able to get something closer to 4 or 5%, at least back then. Another thing you can do is start looking at kind of off the course, non-normal real estate that gets auctioned off. So there's some plots of land that are risky, but no one's bidding on those. And then there's also mobile homes and trailer parks that you can bid on. And at that time, that was kind of a new thing. So there weren't really many bidders on that. And so we said, let's go for that path. And we really weren't bidding against anyone. It was just the two of us sitting in a room bidding on these mobile home tax lien certificates.
That's awesome, because I started the same way. I was in finance. I worked at a Long Island stockbroker company, smaller company. And while I was there, I was reading about real estate in a book, or some ad popped up online, and it said buy properties for like $300 or whatever it was. So I obviously got really intrigued. Now, prior to this, in high school, two of my friends, one kid now. He brought this idea to us when we were in high school, and we basically said, here's a couple dollars, figure it out. We ended up buying pieces of property and doing like some type of land assemblage, and it worked out really well. Then when I was in college, I was interested, played baseball, didn't really care about it. Then it was while I was working, probably about 10 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, it popped back up again. I said, well, I've done one of these before, quasi. It was more or less, I gave my friend some money and it worked. So I did the same thing. And I tell people, anytime you're dealing with tax rules, it's like a game of Monopoly, right? Yeah. You have 1,000 counties and there's tax deeds, there's tax liens. Sometimes you bid down, sometimes it's your highest bid. And every single county has its own rules. So first thing you want to do is understand the rules in the county you're playing in. And I was doing it in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. I did buy some properties, one-offs in some other areas at auctions. I swore up and down I wasn't going to buy anything. But when someone says you can buy a piece of property for $300, you raise your hand and nobody else bids, and then you feel like an idiot. So the first property you went to, did you do any research prior to the auction, or did it just, I showed up, I bid the price down to 1%, or did you educate yourself a little bit more? Because I know that it can get crazy quickly, and you could, you picked up 42 properties or 42 liens at an auction. Because, some of these auctions, there's 5, 6, 7,000 properties over a month that's going to sale. So what did you do anything prior to the auction?
Sure. There actually wasn't a lot you could do. So I think they only released the list of properties that are going up for auction a couple hours before the actual auction, at least in Champaign County. So it's not like we could drive around and see the quality or what state the properties were in. So there's actually not much we could do, which was really scary because just as you said, you don't know what you're going to get at that point. And you might get a lien on a property that's got environmental waste problems. And then you're never going to get your money back on something like that. Or it could be abandoned. Depending on how the city will cut up properties, you could get a parcel of land that's just like 2 feet by 2 feet with nothing on it, that's got no resale value. So there's a lot of risk there, and we just didn't know, and there wasn't enough time to go look at those things. So that's why we decided to go down the path of let's get at least 40 or 42 so that we could diversify a little bit. We knew that there was going to be a handful of those that will return nothing. And that's really the path we went down there. So kind of more of a portfolio approach to those. They were all really inexpensive. So for us, I think those liens ranged from $75 to $400.
There you go.
So kind of all in that range. And it's like $10,000 investment in total. And we made our money back. But certainly there were 5, 6 of them that we just got nothing back in return.
Okay, a calculated risk, because I know that, the first property I bought, I was at an auction. Yeah, I shouldn't have brought the money with me. And, when I first started, I know you could go up with cash in hand, and then they change those rules over time, and every county is different. But I shouldn't have brought the money with me, but I did foolishly. And I told myself, I'm not going to bid on anything. I was watching people go up, 300, 200, 150, 5,000. I'm like, okay, so one, auction, they read off the tax lot, section block and lot, whatever, $350. I was like, okay, sure. Someone's going to outbid me. And of course, no one outbid me. So I won, and I didn't even know how to find the property. It was a whole disaster. I had to go to the county, and one guy's looking at me and he's just like, what'd you do? And they finally explained it to me, but I bought one property. I lost $350 because now here's the downside for me, and you could tell me if there's something different. And this is a great way to start because your downside is so low. I bought a tax delinquent property that was worthless. I thought I could make money with it, so I knocked on the neighbors' doors. Do you want to buy it? One lady laughed at me. She's like, you're like the 5th person to come by. No. But the taxes came up for next year to pay. I just didn't pay them. And it went back to the county. So there was no recourse. There was no liability. Nothing could happen to me because you're not technically, pending your state, the physical owner. Did you guys... Was that something on, you looked at it as a portfolio, which is probably smart because you diversified. And if a handful of them were garbage, a handful of them were probably great wins. Did you guys care about the potential recourse of not paying your taxes for the following year? Or did that not matter in the county that you did it in?
Yeah, no, I think every county probably operates this a little differently. For us in Champaign County, that process was you would pay off the tax lien that hasn't been paid. That doesn't make you the owner of that property. They, the person you just paid it off for now has up to 2 years to pay you back. So they got to pay the fees plus what I paid plus the 18% every 6-month interest.
Yep.
And if after 2 years, I think it's 2 years, if they don't pay after 2 years, then I can go down that path to foreclose on the property and take ownership of it.
Correct.
And only at that point would I then be liable for paying the additional property taxes from the prior year and ongoing. So we never foreclosed on any of those. That was never part of our business plan. We didn't want to go down that path. I think some of it for moral or ethical concerns around just kicking someone out of their house. But for the value that the mobile homes were at, it probably wasn't worth us to foreclose. So we never went down that path. But we did have, out of the 42, 35 or 36 all paid back within that first year.
Yep. So in Philadelphia, it was crazy. And I mean, the shit that was going on was, Chris actually ended up driving properties at one point because it was something that was definitely scalable. I didn't maximize the business plan there, but we got into a legal battle because there was a right of redemption in Philadelphia also. And it was a tax deed sale, but with a 6-month right of redemption only if it was owner occupied 60 days prior to the sale. So just crazy rules. And we bought a property. You're not supposed to do this. But after the auction, I knocked on the door. Kid came to the door, answered it. I said, are you the owner? He said, no. I documented everything. And then I ended up getting into a legal battle with this tenant. And, the auction company represents you in the auction because you technically don't own the property yet. And I went to the court case because they asked me to show up. And the judge literally looked at the homeowner who was claiming that she didn't get the notice and she really lived there, but she was on vacation. The judge literally looked at her and basically said, you better pay him what he wants or you're not going to like the result of this. And it ended up being an amazing win for me. But at that time I was doing it with my cousin and his exact words were exactly that. There's the ethical reason he didn't want to throw anyone out of their house. And I'm not saying I wanted to throw people out of their house, but at the same time, I had a lot of money into that at that time. So, it was eye-opening to see how people lived and the situation people can get themselves into. But, that's the inevitable side of real estate if you don't do the right thing, right? There's consequences and, someone's got to be the reaper. And it's a shitty feeling to throw someone out, or you walk into a situation where a tenant's been paying a landlord for 6 years, then the landlord stopped paying the taxes and the tenant had no idea. So I've seen full walks of life. It's crazy. But I think it's an awesome strategy. And every county, you could do this in your backyard for the most part. You got to figure it out. But the way you went about it was awesome. I just think it was a very calculated gamble. You found a niche that ended up paying off because there are counties like Texas, as it used to be, I don't know if it still is, 25%, 6 months. So you could technically make 50% on your money in a year just by buying properties there, but you got to be careful on what you buy. And some states have longer right of redemptions, but it's an interesting strategy that I think can really pay off, if you put the time into it.
You brought it up earlier. I just want to segue. What's the difference between a tax lien and a tax deed?
Yeah. So for a tax deed, you're buying the physical piece of real estate at the auction. So you own it. Now you may have to foreclose on it depending on the rules. You may be the owner right then and there. A tax lien is you're buying an interest in the property. They have to pay whoever's living there, whoever owes the money has to pay you back plus interest plus fees as, something that you were doing. And there's a variation of everything. There's, redemption states where you could buy the deed, but they can redeem. There's lien states where you could foreclose quicker. Like Arizona, I know some counties in Arizona, it can go back 10 years. So you could be like the 9th guy on the in the batting order and, 7 people ahead of you have to foreclose on all of them. So
any given property may have multiple kinds of liens on it. So this is just
Correct.
tax lien certificates we're talking about. So if you don't pay property taxes, but if you don't pay other things, you can have other kinds of liens on your property as well. So if you don't pay the bank, then you're going to get a different kind of lien. What was nice about the tax lien certificates is those took primary against any other liens. So if there was a mortgage is a lien on a property in a way. So if there was a mortgage on the property and we paid these tax lien certificates and foreclosed, it would actually make the bank no longer have any stake in the claim. And so normally what would happen is if someone doesn't pay their tax certificates, the bank will step in and pay those.
Correct. So yeah, that's a very large part on the lien side, because a bank, if there's a $200,000 mortgage and there's $1,000 property tax, the bank's not going to lose that house for $1,000. So I saw it at the auctions. Philadelphia did both. There was a couple auctions where the banks were there and they would bid the thing to basically the mortgage value because they didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're able to win, there are a couple liens that will take precedent, like, SEC liens and stuff like that would wipe you out. But for the most part, from a power position, you're the first one paid. And that's a really good feeling as an investor, knowing that, I'm going to get my money back plus interest plus whatever. So, no, it's just really interesting. You don't talk to many people that have done it. I think that it was also, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would bring it up and people looked at me like I had like 6 heads. Like, what are you doing? So I think I don't even know what the level of people are doing. I mean, I know people do it all the time, but you don't hear people talk about it much. So I'm glad you brought it up. We obviously have a common interest there, and it's a cool strategy. I think it's something that people can play around with. And worst case scenario, you don't have much risk there.
Yeah. How much, because you guys keep bringing up this county, this strategy, that strategy. Laurence, how much preparation, like let's say somebody hears and like, 16% in 6 months. I think anybody would take that, right? Despite how much headaches or work. It's obviously not that easy, but what are like the bigger challenges going into it for someone that heard that, popped their head up and was like, I'm thinking about this now. What, before you just go buy one, what's some of the stuff you need to understand?
Sure. Well, I would imagine that for most of your listeners, where they're living, it's probably not going to be 18 or 25% for every 6 months. So here, Chicago is in Cook County. That county is massive.
Right.
And there's probably thousands of these kinds of investors, and they'll bid it all the way down to 1%, sometimes 0%. So I don't know that I would want your listeners to walk away with thinking that they're going to get 50% returns on these things. They probably won't. I think where you'll get the opportunity for higher returns or closer to the 18% is in really small counties where there just aren't that many investors with cash, or if it's a new kind of tax lien. So for us, when we did it 15 years ago, I think that was either the first or second year that they included mobile homes on auction. So there was just the investors who had done it in the past didn't even know that was now a thing. And so I think we were able to get in. So I would look for counties, potentially if someone's doing it now, where they're first introducing mobile homes, and that would be a good opportunity, or just really small counties. But then you're also going to just be limited as to what's available. I would also potentially, if you're going to do research in this, drive around that county a little bit to see what state homes are in. Like they just may be in a really disheveled, terrible state, and no one's going to want to own that property. I'd also look to see if there's large pockets of land that might be at auction and without any value. And then potentially if it's an area where there might be environmental hazards. So if it's a county where, upstream or downstream is some sort of nuclear power plant or something like that, you want to avoid that just in case there's any runoff that's hitting your land.
Sure.
Because at that point you might be liable for any of the environmental hazards as well.
The environmentals are bad. That they're gonna attack anybody they can. So those are all good points, right? Because I know we were talking very bullish about it. So someone might listen and go clip off a whatever. And I didn't make 16%. No, I mean you're right. You're probably not gonna get that, but do some research and find out an area that you think could work. But if everything's in disheveled mess, no one's gonna live there. It's worthless. But just be aware of that, because you can buy complete shit. I've done it. I mean, I bought very, very, very dilapidated properties in Philadelphia. So that's a very, very good point.
Markets are dynamic and change over time. So I doubt that tax lien certificates are as good of an investment now as they were back then. So I don't know that I would recommend listeners try to figure out that strategy. It's one of the reasons I moved away from it and moved into kind of the normal buy and hold strategy, because that's got more longer term prospects and is something you can do over and over. And the market always kind of just fits there. That it's very numbers driven, where tax lien certificates are really did you get in at the right time for that county? And so that's more speculative than an investment in a lot of ways.
Without a doubt.
So I was going to segue into that, right? You obviously moved over into the buy and hold, small multifamily side, residential side, whatever you want to consider it. Was there anything throughout that period where you're doing the tax liens that was like, okay, hey, we need to shift? Or was it just always like, hey, this was a means to an end to get to that? What was the thought process there?
Yeah, no, we honestly stumbled on the tax lien certificates just because of what the professor's warnings we had in class.
Right.
As soon as that one time deal was done for us, we didn't re-ante up the next year and buy any more. So over, I think, the next 12 or 18 months when we had gotten paid back, we just never did more of it. And so we moved on. We started our careers. I went down the path of just the normal Joe Schmo working, corporate job. And it was about 4 or 5 years later that bought the first kind of 3 flat here in Chicago. And that was more of a, I want to start accumulating wealth, try to figure out something that's going to put cash in my pocket every month. And that was really the shift.
Gotcha. And then, so during that time you bought one on the side and you were, continuing the, 9 to 5 job, right?
Yeah. Well, I wish it was 9 to 5. It was in the
9 to 9.
Yeah. In the 996 scenario. And so, I had the 3 flats and that was going pretty well. A lot of people think owning a 3 flat is going to make you super wealthy, but it really doesn't. It only adds a little bit of incremental cash, depending on how you manage it. So for me, I think I was getting an extra $1,000 a month out of that 3 flat. And that's actually, in some ways, especially early in your career, a considerable amount. So then you start thinking, well, how can I do more of these? And you're definitely bottlenecked by your down payment, by your income, because banks just don't like to lend to newbie landlords and people who don't have 2+ years of sophisticated rental experience. So that's where it gets hard, and you just have to kind of slog through the first few years, saving up and then building up some sort of track record of managing properties.
Yeah, I think that's something we touched on we did an episode with another guy. He's got a platform called, One Rental at a Time. And it was very similar. It was picking up, one door, over, 3 years, and then another, second one over another 3 years, and then the third one in another 2 years, and then got to like 8, cashed in and, got to 50. I think that's a big, block in a lot of people is when they're trying to do this on their own and pick up rentals. Those first few take a really long time. Like you were saying, there's the loan requirements, the down payment requirements, and you're picking up these properties or these doors over the first, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, however long. And, nobody's life is changing on an extra $1,000, a month or year, whatever it ends up being, depending upon how much you're putting in. And that's really tough to get over sometimes. So what has it been like for you from, starting at that 3, going a few more years? I think you said you picked up another 3, you're under contract to get to 4.
Yeah.
What has that been like? Kind of, I don't want to call it a waiting game because it's not a waiting game, but kind of that long period where it's, it's taken time to get up to.
I'd call it a waiting game in a way. I mean, certainly you still need time because most banks aren't going to do 100% financing. It's very rare. So that first one, they definitely won't. And what's really unfortunate is when you're trying to buy that rental property, they're still looking at your income to debt ratios, and they don't include the rental income as part of your income.
Yeah.
So especially for your first property, they won't include any of that. They just discount it to 0. So they want to know that you can, out of your ordinary income, cover the mortgage for that first property. And then after that, you basically have to rent it for 2 years before they'll say, hey, okay, I can see what the rent rolls are like over those past 2 years. And then I can apply that that's now part of your income for the next property. And then on the second property, they still won't include the rent from the new property in calculating out whether you can afford it or not. It's only for me at least, only on the third property where they're like, oh, okay, we get it. You've done this before. We'll include the rent on this new third building as part of the process to approve you. And then they're also a lot more flexible in terms of how much down you have to, how much of a down payment you need. So now my banker is willing to be flexible on that. We're even sometimes doing commercial loans instead of a residential loan, knowing that, look, in 5 years, we'll either refinance it or we'll convert it to a single family home or something. So it is a waiting game. If I had to describe it, it's like 2 years, 2 years, 3 years, and then it's like now you can get one every 6 months if you wanted.
Gotcha. And as you've gone through that, is there anything that you did that helped you kind of stay the course and, not get frustrated and fed up and, kind of throw your hands up in the air like, this isn't worth it. I could be putting $1,000 a month into the, the stock market or into mutual fund, another vehicle besides this, which has taken, years and years and years.
Sure. I also invest quite a bit in the stock market as well. So I'd say I'm evenly split between the two. What I like about real estate is it's definitely hands-on. I actually like that. I prefer that. And it's physical. It's a tangible thing here. I remember seeing some quote on your guys' website from Franklin Roosevelt where it talks about real estate is the only thing that has longevity to it. Anything else can just kind of evaporate. So I still like that just for de-risking or diversification or whatnot. But it's also nice to get tangible income. So stock market doesn't really do that unless you're focused on dividend only. Sure. And then it's just a really low yield typically. So it doesn't make sense. So to answer your question, like how do you stay focused on it? I think it's 2 things that is going to make someone successful. The first is when you purchase the property. That's when you're going to make your money, even though you don't realize it. You have to purchase it correctly. You have to get something that's going to have a good cash on cash return for you and a good monthly income. You don't want to invest in something that takes money out of your pocket every month. That's not sustainable for you. So that's the first thing. You got to purchase correctly. And then the second thing, unfortunately, especially if you're a beginner, you have to do it yourself. If you try to hire a property manager, they're going to take 10% of the rent. They're going to take that full month's rent to find you a tenant. And all of a sudden, what might have been a profitable investment is actually costing you money. And then you're just better off not being a landlord at that point. So I think those 2 things are absolutely critical if you're getting started. Purchase correctly and manage it yourself. it's the second one that led my business partner and I down the path of starting Avail. It's because it's really hard to manage it yourself if you just don't know what you're doing.
So I was just about to ask, did that have any, the answer is yes, but that going down that second about the management component, that's something we talk about all the time internally. What was the light that clicked that said, this is something we want to do. There's a void in the market. We can capitalize on it, because you're right. I mean, managing deals is what will make or break the deal better or worse, or it's going to run a little bit better. Cash flow is a little bit stronger. What was that? Was that like an aha moment? What clicked for you to start your, the tech company and focus on that, or any and all of that?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start on just having good financial sense when buying a property first. So for me now, I tend to only get something that's going to yield a 7 or 8% cash on cash return. Mm-hmm. And I won't do anything else. And to me, that's the one metric I look at. A lot of people look at cap rate. But I want to know that my money is bringing me back more money. I think it's the closest thing to comparing your investment in the stock market. So I tend to look at cash on cash more than the others. And then you just have to put a hard line in the sand. Sometimes we can get emotional about buying a property. And you should know going in, this is the metric that I'm using, and I'm not going to go below that metric. So that's one, just good financial prudence. And then, there are definitely several aha moments. I'm trying to think of exactly when it was, but I was screening a tenant, or I had a tenant come by for a showing, and I wanted to hand them a rental application to fill out. And I had made this rental application in Excel by merging cells together and trying to make it look pretty. And I was printing it out, and my buddy came over and was watching me do this. And he's like, "What are you doing? Why, how could you not go online and get something like this?" And so we went online, and there was nothing 7-8 years ago. At that time, if you wanted something a little nicer, you'd go to Staples, and you'd get you'd go to the bottom shelf and you'd pick out like their pre-canned forms. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer and said, you should basically never use those, especially the lease templates, because those are not going to be city compliant. There's so many things you have to do with the lease and disclosures and stuff. So we just went all down this path, seeing how there wasn't anything for us. And we just this is silly. This is not how professionals would manage a property. And if we're going to continue to grow our portfolio, then something's got to change. And we just realized we weren't the only ones that would be having these problems, and said, let's do something about it. So did the crazy thing, quit our jobs, which was, we quit our jobs pretty much unprepared, because at that time we didn't have a business plan or a business case, and it's software, and neither one of us knew technology or how to code or something like that. And so we actually spent that first year teaching ourselves to code and built the website ourselves. Like, it's really hard to find someone who's going to build a website for you for free, or even if it's not for free, for equity in something that doesn't have any value. So we just rolled up our sleeves, built it ourselves. And in a lot of ways, the product we have today satisfies the needs that we had even early on.
So you're telling me it's not good advice to quit your job with no business plan. Is that what you're saying?
If you're going to do it only once and when you're young.
There you go. No, I think, a lot of what you said is important. You hear it all the time. Buying right is, where you make your money. When you sell is when you actually collect. So I think that's super important. I think also, when you touched on, hey, this is what I'm looking for and I'm going to stick to it. That's something we believe in tremendously, because, we see, hundreds of deals a year, and we might buy 3 or 4 or 5, whatever. Maybe this year might be more, but we have certain things we look for. And when you work with investors, especially, it's a little different when it's your own money. You can say, I'll take 6% on this one because it's, literally next to my house, or it's, next to this park, which I know is going through this redevelopment, or whatever it may be. You can, it's your money. You can do whatever you want. But, for us, we know what people are looking for, and, we have to stick to that and be able to produce it. So I think it's, a big credit to you that, you didn't get frustrated and, toe the line and, kind of lower your expectations until you found those properties. I'm sure now sitting here, going into your third property, I'm sure there's properties you looked at where you got pretty close and thought, oh, maybe I can make this work, and ended up passing on it despite that. Right or wrong?
Yeah, almost all of them.
Glad to know I'm not the only one.
Yeah, you could round to basically I've bought 0 properties in a way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I think the benefit you guys have is you have a business behind it. You're taking investor money, just as you said. And I think any landlord who's going to, any person who's going to enter this and become a do-it-yourself landlord really has to come with that mindset of being a business, treat it like a business. And unfortunately, we find a lot of, even in our own industry and with our own customers, we find a lot of them don't view themselves as a business. And if you don't do that, you're not going to take it seriously and you're not going to grow it. You get yourself into trouble. So that's one of the first things we recommend is that people think about it as a business.
Yeah. When you were, the platform you created was basically about creating better efficiencies, which is freeing up time. Was any part of that like, hey, I'm spending X amount of time on this stuff and I don't think I could get to 20 units doing it this way. So I've got to create a new way to free up time to go do more myself. Was that any part of it? Or it was just, this is annoying that I've got to do this in Excel all the time and, I've got to change it, or a little bit of both?
It honestly started because I actually didn't know what I was supposed to do. And so, when I got that first 3 flat, it's, I don't know where I was supposed to get a lease. Am I supposed to pay a lawyer? Do I pay $500 for this thing? What should I ask on a rental application? Am I supposed to get a credit report? Is that even legal? Am I allowed to see one of those? Mm-hmm. And then you try to figure out, well, how are you going to collect rent? And so you just enter it in with a lot of questions and you don't know what you're going to do. And you've already got tenants in place. If you are buying a 3 flat, there's likely already tenants. And so all of a sudden you've got to flip that switch really quickly. And so you have this natural tendency to go around trying to figure out solutions, and you're asking people. A lot of people would go to a property manager at that point for help. And like I was close to that. And then you just see the fees that the property manager's asking. And you're like, I can't, I should sell if I'm going to do this. It's making me lose $200, $300 a month instead of make. So for me, that ended up being like, okay, I need to figure out how to find tenants. So how do I post a listing at that time on Craigslist, or where's the best place to post it? And so that was the first thing we built, was how should landlords find tenants? And so we ended up building a gateway into Zillow, Truly on Hotpad. So a landlord would create a listing with us on Avail, and we'd automatically syndicate that to kind of all the various websites so that they would best position themselves to find tenants. So just everywhere. And we tended to avoid Craigslist just because of the quality of tenant that you would likely get. And so I think even today now, when a landlord posts a listing, they get 18 leads in that first week. It's just massive because you're putting it everywhere. And so for us, it was 1, how do you find tenants? And then 2, how do you go about screening them? If you're getting that many leads, how do you start narrowing it down? And you obviously start with a rental application. And most landlords don't know, I think, that they can get a credit report or where to get one. And so you'll take those 18 leads and you'll say, hey, I need you to authorize me to get a credit report. And they'll hook in through our website and connect to TransUnion via an API, and they'll authorize those things that will return a credit report, criminal background check, eviction check. You really ought to be looking at those things. So everything that we built was kind of just born out of, I don't know where to go and how to do it. So kind of became an expert at it, and then built the software to allow other landlords to become experts at it. And so we essentially take them from the finding tenants, screening them. We provide a digital lease that's state and city specific that will pull in all the disclosures, pull in clauses that are specific to certain localities. The tenants, the landlords, they log in, they sign it digitally. And then you start thinking about, okay, what's the ongoing maintenance and management of the property? And so you have to collect rent. Your tenants want a portal online to pay it. I would rather have it deposit to my bank account. And so we've built the functionality to make that happen. But again, all of it just came out of, here's what I need, and then how do I go about solving that?
No, for sure. I think that's huge, because we were talking, we did another podcast earlier. So if you guys listened to the last one, same day, we were talking about why people don't get involved and why they wait 2 or 3 years. And, it's that fear aspect. I think if you can set yourself up with something that's going to eliminate a lot of the unknowns that you don't have, it's just going to provide a better experience going into it, as well as, take some of that fear or risk off the table of, well, what happens if, I'm 6 months into it, I gave this tenant a lease that doesn't, isn't actually applicable in the state I'm in, and now they're going to get 6 months free. Not that I think a lot of people are thinking that, but it's a valid concern.
No, 100%.
If you can take that off the table,
no, I think
that's hugely valuable.
Like a platform that you guys have, I think it's a tough like you said, you get to 2,000, 3,000 units, you have Yardi, you have all these major platforms that are just way too cost prohibitive for a smaller landlord. So, a smaller landlord's most likely the guy or the girl that's going to have the questions. And to have everything at the click of a button that can be verified, that can help you, is a tool that you need in your toolbox. Because owning a 3-unit building anywhere, it has its own challenges, let alone if you have to deal with the legal component, the finding tenant component, the maintenance component. If you can make that streamline that process, it just makes, okay, I've partnered up with Avail or whatever company it is. And, I'm not, I've never used Avail. I don't know the platform, but if that's the partner you choose and they're going to take something off the table, and I recommend everyone check out the website if it's something, because I don't know of, even on the mobile home side for us, we've been talking about, where are you going to get something that's affordable for a 30-lot park or a 20-lot park? So I'm definitely going to check it out, and shame on me for not going there before. But if that's
came prepared today.
Yeah, I came very prepared. If you can have that in your toolbox and make sure a lot of that's taken care of, you're just better equipped to make a right decision on the deal. And like I said, draw the line in the sand with the deal that you're looking for, whether it's a 7%, 8%, 10% cash on cash, cap rate, IRR, whatever you're looking for. But when you have the resources right behind you where you can go to a website and it's going to deliver everything you need, it's going to take the management component and make it easier. Because you're right, third-party management on a deal like that may or may not work, and that's going to deter people from getting involved. Or if they get involved, they're going to wave the white towel so quickly because they're going to lose money every month. So having, whether you're doing it yourself or using third party, I'm not saying one way is better than the other, but you got to have the right resources. And this is coming from someone that did it and built a platform specifically for his needs, which I think anyone in real estate are going to have the same questions and concerns. So I think it's very important.
I think it goes back to, when you're investing, understanding what you want to get out of it. Like, I know I have no desire to go fix a toilet at 2 in the morning. As much as I'd love to own a 3-unit by myself, as well as, the stuff we do, I don't do it because, one, I don't think property managers are the best in that space or haven't met any. There's probably some that are going to disagree with me and love to talk to them. But, I don't know that I trust it, but I also don't want to have to deal with all that stuff myself, which is why, we're doing the stuff we're doing, because you have, great property managers that do it, but if you can take some of that away and create that opportunity, I think it makes a lot more sense from that standpoint. But
part of it for me was just looking at when we started this. I mean, we tailed property managers. We looked at what they were doing, and they aren't doing anything more than what you would do yourself. They're using a tool that automates most of the process for them. They're maybe only putting in 10, 20 minutes a week on your property. It's not a lot. And it makes you wonder, why do you pay so much for that? And if you can take the same tools that they're using and use them yourself, then it doesn't make sense to pay them. And part of it too, for me, was just like, I know with one of the properties I was looking at that I turned down, we went to go to the showing. The real estate agent was there, and so was the property manager. And we toured the place, and it was raining that day. I'm looking up at the exterior of the building, and I'm seeing all this water run off the side of the building right next to the gutters. And they weren't going through the gutters. They were going past the gutters, which means the gutters were blocked and clogged. And you could tell it had been that way for a while, because you could already see some erosion happening on the brick. And it just makes you wonder, like, why would the property manager not have looked at that, been aware of it, and done something about it? Because all that water is going into those units eventually.
Yeah, 100%.
And when it does, the property manager doesn't face any liability there.
Correct.
The owner has to. So in some ways, it's like, property manager takes everything off the table for you, but also can put you at severe risk without you realizing it.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm actually curious about this. How many people that are using your platform you may or may not know the answer to this, are local versus like out of state or not close by?
Yeah, no, I do know the answer.
Okay.
So this is true of both of our platform, but also most landlords. So 70% of them operate within 20 miles of their house, will have their rental properties. So really close. It's a huge number. And I don't actually think people realize how many do-it-yourself landlords there are, how many small landlords there are. I think last time I checked these numbers, I think there were 44 million rental units in the United States in total. Mm-hmm. And landlords who own, like the landlords we're talking about, own 24 million of those units. So they're owning more than half of all rental properties in the United States. And I don't think people are realizing how big a population that is.
No, I mean, there's so many people you hear about. It's just like they own another, like friends with parents, they just own another house and they rent it out. And that's, a ton of people. I didn't realize until I really started getting into real estate, I didn't really understand that my dad had owned another house that he rented out when I was a kid. I always knew that we moved from that house to another house and he rented it out for several years to students that went to Stony Brook, which is a college by us. But there was tenants that were students that my dad was friendly with that I knew when I was a kid. I just never put two and two together until like a year and a half into it. I was like, oh, that's who that was. Yeah. And it's crazy because you hear about it all the time. And it was literally 5 miles away. I did not expect 70%. That's much higher than I would have thought, because everybody nowadays that you hear online is, live where you want, invest where you want. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So it's interesting to hear that.
Well, I think the 70% used to be a lot higher, and because of what's happening, it's come down a little bit. But it is interesting because if you go to a library or a bar or wherever you go socially, and you start talking to someone, they're never going to be like, oh yeah, I'm a landlord. It just doesn't come up in conversation. So people don't really realize how many landlords there really are. There's also like a stigma with it. So I think that's part of why people don't talk about it. Other than like on these real estate specific podcasts, people don't go about the world talking about it. One of the things that I tend to do is I go to Google a lot and I'll look at their autocomplete. So if you type in landlords are and you look at what it auto selects for you, I always find it curious to see what it is. So you'll see like landlords are scum, landlords are parasites, landlords are greedy. And you can do the same thing with tenants. And you can say tenants are and see what Google autocompletes. And it'll be like tenants are cheap or tenants are risky or whatever it is. Like one of the things I've always had as part of my goal is there going to be a time where Avail is successful enough where you do a Google search and it's changed? And it's not so much like a this or them or having those negative stigmas. That's something I benchmark every quarter to see, are we making any headway at making it more of a friendlier search? Yeah,
I think you got a big uphill battle ahead of you, but I'll be curious to see if you guys ever get there. That's ties into the whole Facebook thing. People love negativity more than they do positivity.
Yeah. Sometimes you type stuff in and you're like, I can't even believe that's what came up. Like, it's so bad. You're like, you got to be kidding me. That's shocking to me that the majority of people, that's the answer that it gets. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'm somewhat convinced it's not necessarily the most popular one and just one they think is funny. But that's neither here nor there. So you've been in this company for, you've developed it over the last 7-8 years. Do you have any interesting, insights or experiences you can share with people that you think would be valuable or helpful, whether it's, just as a landlord, whether it's, investing, whether it's with the platform? I know that's a loose thing, but, I think it's interesting that, you work with, probably hundreds of people. You've probably heard tons of stories and stuff. Anything come to mind that you think's interesting?
Yeah. I mean, I generally try to get a lot more personal with our customers, as personal as I can, but we've got 150,000 landlords who use us. So it's hard to get to know every single one of them.
So you don't speak to each one every week?
We actually speak to a lot of them. I'd say it gets up there. But one of the things that's definitely probably the most important for where I see landlords being successful and others not is having a process. So having a tool like Avail, great. That's going to help and you can build that into your process, but you just have to have a process. You've got to realize that, look, you've got to have this idea of, I've got this open property. There's a leasing cycle behind it, right? I know I have to, think about renewals with tenants. And then if they want to renew, there's this window I have to try to get a new tenant in, and trying to be early in that process and thinking about those things is absolutely critical. They just have to have a process. So what does your standard rental application look like? What does your lease look like? Am I going to be the kind of landlord who's forgiving if rent is late or not? They really need to answer all those questions for themselves and establish that and live by it at every part of that process. That's what's going to make them the most successful. If they start to deviate from that, then tenants will take advantage of that. If you give a tenant, it's fine if you're 5 days late this month, then they're going to be late 6 days next month. And you've just got to figure out where do you want to draw the line in the sand and how do you want to develop your process and your decision-making tree.
For sure. I think it's important too, a tool is only as good as you make use of it. We were talking about that today with, different CRMs we're looking at, because we don't do nearly a good enough job on, following up with investors that fall through the cracks. And and trying forever. And we're going back and forth, this one, that one, whatever. And we've, done trials for several. And we just, at the end of the day, it's, we're not utilizing it well enough and creating those systems or processes, to your point, that gets the most out of that tool, because, there's probably one that is the best for us, whether we find it or not, but they're all probably pretty close, especially in today's day and age. But if you don't personally take on the responsibility to create those systems, create those processes, figure out what's most important to you and prioritizing them, it doesn't matter what you're using, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, I completely agree there. I mean, you can have a tool try to get you a credit report, but you've got to be the one that says, listen, I want 3 times income to rent. I want to make sure credit score hits this threshold. You've got to be the one to set those standards for yourself.
For sure.
Is there, like for your platform, like after, is there a too big or too small landlord for you?
There's no too small. So, on those 24 million units in the United States that are owned by small landlords, 8 million of them, that represents 8 million owners. So on average, it's 3 units per landlord. Okay. And I'd say the mode is 1. So most landlords own just 1 unit. And so we can't set our sights on someone who's too small, because most landlords do have just 1 unit. And that's honestly the person who needs the most help.
Yep.
And so we've actually built our product mostly around the single unit landlords. And so nothing too small. On the too big, I think we're really good for 5, 10, 15, 20 unit landlords. After that, it starts to get a little harder for people to use our platform. We do have some landlords with 200 units, 300 units, but like the UI wasn't built for that. So there's just a lot more scrolling they're having to do to figure out what unit they're trying to do something for. So, yep. Yeah.
No, I did, and I asked that question for anyone listening. If you're buying 1 unit, don't say you can't do it because you don't have this platform, because that's, there's something for you. But if you give someone a screwdriver and you tell them to build a house, they're not going to be able to. Mm-hmm. So the process behind the tool is important. So there's don't use the excuse there's no streamlined process, because there is. Mm-hmm. That's important for people to hear. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. What is the biggest, I guess, challenge you're solving for? I know you touched on it a little bit, but what's the biggest challenge you're solving?
Yeah, honestly, what we're like, in a lot of ways, we're just trying to bring transparency to the marketplace, because I tend to think of like how a single landlord operates now, and they don't have all the information that they need. They don't have the same information as a property manager, and so they're at a disadvantage. And so in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is bring all those landlords together so that they have the same kind of power that a property manager would have and the same ability to make decisions effectively. For us as a company, the biggest challenge is how do you go about finding these landlords? I can't go to the bars and ask them, are you your landlord? Because that's not the normal approach. Most of them don't recognize themselves as being landlords. And
sure.
There's 8 million of them, and they tend to be really small. So they're not listed in the phone book. They're not out there. They're not participating in like landlord symposiums. So it's actually kind of a challenge figuring out how you're going to go about defragmenting this market so that you can provide them the power that they need. So that's really our challenge as a business. But the challenge for the industry is just trying to bring transparency between the landlord, the tenant, and a property manager, and trying to figure out how you can make that a little more seamless.
Fantastic. I think that's an awesome place to kind of wrap it up. Laurence, thank you so much for joining, sharing your insight, a little bit about your platform and experience and stuff. If people want to get a hold of you, learn more about you or the company or anything else, where can they reach you? Where should they go?
Sure. They can email us at hello@avail.co. So, HELLO @AVAIL.co. Happy to answer questions. That'll actually come to me directly most of the time.
Awesome. So we'll include that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.